Hello there, I'm a Daily reviewing 2016's The Void. Back in 1985, I saw a movie called Reanimator at the Carriage Square Theater, and holy moly was that movie bonkers. It was my entrance into the writings of Howard Phillips Lovecraft, better known as H.P. Lovecraft. Lovecraft was a writer from the early 20th century, and Reanimator was inspired by his story, Herbert West Reanimator. Having enjoyed the movie, I bought this book and was off to the horror story races. Now, a number of stories that Lovecraft wrote are best described as cosmic horror. The idea being that there are higher powers out there in the universe, and they aren't interested in the welfare of man. Stories like The Call of Cthulhu and At the Mountain of Madness are wonderful examples of this. Now, one of the elements of The Call of Cthulhu is the discovery of a cult that worships the Great Old Ones, ancient powerful beings that have fallen to a death-like sleep. These cults engage in human sacrifice in the hopes of bringing about the reawakening and return of the Great Old Ones. One of the co-writers of The Void, Jeremy Gillespie, had met Guillermo del Toro while del Toro was working on his adaptation of the Lovecraft story At the Mountains of Madness. Sadly, that movie fell through and was never made, but it did get Gillespie to think about how he would do a Lovecraft-inspired movie. And that result is The Void. Meet Sheriff Deputy Daniel Carter, our main protagonist. He's trying to stay awake on a quiet night shift in the middle of nowhere. Dispatch calls him to see if he's okay and says that they will see him soon since his shift is almost over. But before that can happen, a man stumbles out of the woods and collapses onto the road ahead of Carter's police cruiser. Thinking it's a teenager that has had too much to drink, Carter goes over to check on him and sees that the man has been assaulted. He loads him up in his police cruiser and heads back towards town. He heads to the nearest hospital, but it's operating with a skeleton crew as they recently had a fire and are in the process of moving to a new building. Once there, Carter takes the man inside and calls for help. He is answered by Nurse Allison Frazier, who turns out to be Carter's ex. She calls for another nurse named Beverly to bring a stretcher. They then load him up in a manner that's not advised for someone with probable physical trauma. Well, if he didn't have any rib fractures beforehand. Alice and Beverly then take our mystery injury person to go see Dr. Powell. In the meantime, we're going to be introduced to some of the peripheral players. This is Kim. She's a nursing student, and she is annoying a patient who won't be around long enough to learn his name. He says that he's going to sleep, and Kim leaves. Back out in the waiting area, we meet Ben and his granddaughter Maggie. Maggie is expecting, and says that Dr. Powell said that tonight might be the night. Deputy Carter is happy for her when we hear some screaming off-screen. Carter gets up to investigate, and we see that it is our mystery person who is raising a fuss, and the nurses are trying to hold him still while the doctor gives him a sedative. Ah, magic movie sedatives. Strong enough to work immediately, but not so strong that they stop him from breathing. If only. Whoa. Ashley goes through the man's wallet and finds out that the guy's name is James. Doc Powell then says that quite possibly one of the dumbest things I've ever heard.
The sedative will help us determine exactly what his condition is.
The sedative has rendered the man unconscious, and now they can't ask the most basic of ER medicine questions. What happened to you? Doc Powell then says that the resources are limited, that they've been packed up for the move. I suppose that goes for the X-ray and CT machines as well. Allison notes that James has multiple needle marks on his arms. Deputy Carter then cusses as he notices that there are several bloodstains on his uniform. Cut to a bit later and Carter is cleaning his uniform. Allison comes to see him and we learn that they used to be an item. The keywords being used to. Doc Powell shows up and Allison leaves. The doc tells Carter that James is sleeping for now, and it looks like that he had been roughed up a bit, but is otherwise fine. A bit later, Carter is walking down one of the hospital halls when he hears some crying. He goes into the room and he finds Beverly with the patient we saw earlier. She pulls a pair of scissors out of the guy's eyes and turns to face Carter. Her face is covered with blood. Beverly says, "This isn't my face," and then cuts a piece of skin off of her face, and I realize that she had already cut quite a bit of skin off as well. Carter tells her to stop, and she holds up the scissors so that she can stab Carter. He keeps telling her to stop until she charges at him, and he shoots her. Seconds later, Allison, Kim, and Doc Powell arrive having heard the gunshot. All are horrified at what has happened. Carter says that he is to phone it in, and he goes to the bathroom to throw up. Clearly he is in shock from having had to kill Beverly. After he vomits, he has a vision and passes out. He is found by Allison and Doc Powell. Carter once again says that he needs to call this in, and Doc Powell says that a state trooper is already here. Carter tracks down the trooper and recognizes him as Mitchell. He gives Mitchell a report of what happened with Nurse Beverly, and he asks how he got here so fast. Mitchell said that he is interested in the guy that Carter brought in. There was a bloodbath at a farm to about 20 miles away. Allison chimes in that most of the blood that they found on the man wasn't his own, and Mitchell says that the guy has multiple drug-related priors, and he thinks that the guy may have drugged Beverly, so he has him cuffed to the bed. Mitchell then asks for Carter's gun. Carter gives Mitchell the gun and asks if he can go call this in to his dispatch. Mitchell says sure, and Carter tries to call from the phone at the front desk, but the line is dead. He radios Mitchell to say that he's going out to his car to make the call from there. Out in his cruiser, he discovers that the radio isn't working either. He then sees a robed figure standing in the parking lot about 20 feet away. He gets out of the car to see who this weirdo is. There is a noise in the distance that startles Carter, and the lights at the hospital go out. The figure then pulls out a knife and charges Carter. The two go to ground and struggle with the knife. The robed figure slowly forces the knife down until it starts to penetrate into Carter's chest. Carter is then able to shove the figure off of him and gets up and runs back into the hospital as he sees more robed figures arriving. Carter collapses to the floor in the ER entrance, and the others rush to help him. He has more visions.
Whoa.
Carter wakes up on the ER floor. Doc Powell has sewed up his puncture, stopping the bleeding. Carter gets up and Mitchell is there saying that the robed figures have the hospital surrounded, but aren't trying to come in yet. As they consider their options to securing the hospital, we hear screaming coming from the prisoner's room. Carter and Mitchell rush to the room and find Beverly, only she has been transformed into something not human, something with tentacles. James has his gurney between him and the Beverly creature, and is understandably screaming for help. Mitchell draws his gun and puts a couple of rounds into the creature, but to little effect. Carter, for his part, breaks the bed rail, and James runs out into the hallway. Carter then pushes Mitchell out into the hallway and follows behind him. Carter announces, "Break! We are leaving!" Those that didn't go into the room are all like, "Why?" And before he can answer, shots ring out in the parking lot. Then 2 new men come in, and one has a gun. He points it at James, who grabs Maggie and holds a scalpel to her neck. Doc Powell tries to calm things down, only for James to stab him in the neck with the scalpel. Could this night get any worse? The Beverly creature has gotten out of the room and grabs Mitchell. Things don't go well for Mitchell. Carter tries to help him, and the Beverly creature backhands him away. The 2 new arrivals show up and go after it with axes, eventually killing it. This movie is not rated, but it definitely earns an R from me. They head back to the ER, and most everyone is like, "Let's get out of here," and the 2 new arrivals say, "Good luck getting past all the hooded psychos outside," as more and more seem to be drawn to the hospital. Allison and Carter want to know who these guys are, but they aren't forthcoming. With tensions running high, Carter says that he doesn't want to be around when the Beverly creature comes back to life, since he killed her once already. We then see a stretcher with the burning remains of Beverly roll out into the parking lot. Back in the hospital, Maggie's pregnancy is beginning to advance, and Allison says that she needs some medical supplies to help with the delivery. Carter doesn't want to be wandering through the hospital unarmed, and convinces the 2 new arrivals to go with him out to his cruiser to get a shotgun and other supplies. When they go outside, the cruiser seems much further away now, but on the plus side, the hooded people are nowhere to be seen. They get to the cruiser safely, with the younger of the 2 new men unloading the trunk while his partner stands watch and Carter tries to unlock the shotgun inside the car. Back in the hospital, things are advancing with the baby, and Allison decides to head to the supply room to get the supplies that she needs in case they need to deliver the child. A mystery figure appears behind her. Back outside, a jittery Carter is having trouble with unlocking the shotgun when many hooded figures appear out of the dark. Worse still, one is behind the guy unloading the trunk, and he gets jumped. Carter finally gets the shotgun free and kills the cultist at the trunk, and then they all rush back into the hospital. Once inside, Carter finds out that Allison went to go get supplies, and he takes the older new man with him to find her. On the way, they see Doc Powell's coat on the floor, but his body is gone. We also learn from the man that the cultists killed the family of the younger unarmed man, but he turns surlier when asked what his story is. They get to the supply room and Allison isn't there. They grab some supplies and head back to the ER. As they make their way there, they hear a phone ringing in Dr. Powell's office. The light flashing on the phone shows that the call is coming from the morgue. Carter picks up the phone. It's Dr. Powell. He says some cryptic things about how it's hard to understand what is going on, but he promises that he's going to help everyone. While Carter is on the phone, the other man is going through items in the office and finds pictures of cultists and a journal with notes and drawings of triangles. Back in the ER, Kim, the nursing student, is not thrilled to learn that she's being left in charge of Maggie, while Carter and the two cultist hunters are going to go to the morgue to rescue Allison. The older one isn't keen on going down there and says that maybe they should just ask James what is going on, and shows a Polaroid picture of James with the cultists. Time to talk with James. James says it's all the doc's fault. Carter says to tell us something that they don't know. James says that he met a girl who took him to a farmhouse to score some crystal meth. There, Doc Powell and the cultist would give them drugs and watch them have sex, and would kill some of the druggies as sacrifices. They decide to take James with them down to the morgue, and James is not thrilled with this idea. As they make their way down to the morgue, we can see the damage from the fire that we heard about earlier. Carter uses his radio to ask Kim where the morgue is, and she tells him it should be at the end of the hall at the bottom of the stairs. But Carter and company just find more stairs going down. Cut to Allison waking up. She hears Dr. Powell's voice. Didn't he die? Dr. Powell says that his transformation is fascinating. He says that when his daughter Sarah died, he went looking for answers to how to reverse that. Back to Carter and the others looking for Allison. They come to a door with a black triangle painted on it. The older of the cultist hunters is reticent, but Carter says this is it. They open the door and go in. As they enter the darkness behind the door, we hear Doc Powell's voice. He says that some of his experiments into reanimating the dead are still here in the hospital, that he made mistakes and that these things started the fire in the hospital, that they wanted to die but he won't let them. He says that tonight his little girl is coming back, and he pulls back the sheet over Allison to reveal her pulsating abdomen. The men come to a large room with many bodies in various states of disrepair. They see one body bludgeoning itself onto a metal spike repeatedly and realize, this ain't right. The other bodies then come to life and start coming after them.
Bogus!
Cut to the ER and nursing student Kim. Maggie has gone into labor and Kim is to step up. She opens her textbook onto a section on C-sections and gets a scalpel, but she doesn't have it in her to perform one. Ben tells her that she's the only one that can do this, and then his throat is cut. Ben falls over and we see a blood-soaked Maggie smiling. She says that it's finally time, that she is blessed to give birth to Doc Powell's child. A couple of cultists appear at the door and Maggie walks off with them. Back downstairs, the men have been separated and Carter finds the room with Allison. She's lying on the table and looks normal. Carter takes her hand and says that he is here. Everything is going to be all right. She moves his hand down to her swollen belly and says that she can feel it coming. We hear Doc Powell's voice. He tells Carter that he knows his secret, that the night he and Allison had lost the baby, he saw relief in Carter's eyes. The scene changes and we see Allison has been transformed. She is now some sort of birthing creature with tentacles strewn across the room. Powell says that he turned her into what she wanted to be, a mother. Carter takes an axe and kills the Allison creature. We fade to black, and then the lights come back on. We see a glowing triangle. Doc Powell asks Carter if he understands what is happening. Carter says that a nut thinks he is God. Powell is disappointed. He says that there are things older than God and that they have blessed him. Death is no longer an obstacle, and he will have his daughter back. Maggie arrives with the cultist and stabs Carter in the back. Carter falls to the ground as a skinless and changed Powell walks out onto the stage in front of the glowing triangle. He tells Carter to bear witness to the power of the abyss and begins an incantation. The triangle begins to open and glow brighter. Carter has a vision of the other side and a reddish skull emerging from the dark. Maggie asks Powell to bless her baby. He comes over to her and places a hand on her adoring face. He asks his higher powers to place his daughter into this willing vessel. Maggie smiles until she has a vision of the birth. She screams in horror and backs away. She looks towards the wounded Carter for help and screams again as her abdomen stretches out. There is an explosion of blood and Powell's daughter is born. It may be his daughter, but it's certainly no longer human. A shot rings out and flesh explodes on the daughter. It's the return of the two cultist hunters. The older fires a second shot at the creature, and it chases after them into another room. In there, it catches the older man with its tentacles and begins plunging more tentacles into the man's abdomen. The older man empties a bottle of rubbing alcohol on himself and the creature and tells the young cultist hunter to set them on fire. The young man does so and flees. Back in the temple area, Powell says that they will all be saved. Everything has led to his ascension. Powell starts to merge with the universe, and we get a flash of the dark pyramid, and we come back to the temple. Carter lands an axe blow into Powell's chest. Powell grabs Carter by the throat and tells him that he can be with Allison again. All he has to do is die first. This isn't the end. Carter says, "Oh yes it is," and he grabs a hold of Powell and leaps into the glowing triangle. It flares brightly and then disappears. The hospital rumbles and begins to shake. The young cultist hunter is fleeing down a hallway, and everything shakes apart, the daughter creature following after him. The walls begin to close in, and he leaps forward, landing in a normal hospital hallway, the hallway to the other dimension closing behind him. He makes it to the ER, and he sees the dead body of Ben, and he hears a noise. He finds Kim in hiding with an axe, and she collapses into his arm, asking if it's all over. We cut to a dark world with mountains jutting up in unusual shapes in the distance. Carter and Allison stand together looking up in wonder in the sky. Above them floats a giant black pyramid. The end. And there you have it, The Void. This is not an adaptation of any of Lovecraft's works, but it certainly feels like it could have been written by Lovecraft. Normal people thrown into bizarre and otherworldly situations beyond the understanding of man. And just like many of Lovecraft's stories, not many answers are provided, and in this case, I'm alright with that. I have to admit, while I generally like my stories to make sense, they don't always have to have answers for everything. Just look at the movie Alien from 1979. There is no explanation given about the alien ship that they find, why it's there, what happened to it, why it's carrying all those eggs, and yet it's one of the best horror movies out there. In 2012, the movie Prometheus tried to answer those questions, and look at how that turned out. And due to the lack of answers, I will admit, this movie is not for everyone. Because there are questions aplenty to be had. Such as, why did Beverly kill the patient? Was she a part of the cult? Did Powell put some sort of whammy on her? Was it a side effect of the merging of the two dimensions under the hospital? Who knows? The writer-directors intentionally left things vague so the audience could come up with theories on their own. So your enjoyment of this film may depend on how wed you are to answers. As it happens, I was in the mood for Lovecraft, and this scratched that itch nicely, so I was willing to overlook some thin writing. I must say that I'm impressed with the look of the movie. I can only find mention that the filmmakers raised $83,000 for the creature effects off of Indiegogo, but the film clearly looks like it cost more than that. So props to the crew for rising to the occasion, because this certainly doesn't look or feel like grade Z schlock. This is a creepy movie with a moderate amount of gore, with the most graphic stuff happening off screen and being hinted at. There is some tension to the film, but for me at least, it didn't keep building and building. It sort of plateaued off about halfway through the film. The cultists were definitely underused props to the story, standing outside to keep everyone in the hospital, but gone when you needed the heroes to do something. So while not a perfect film, it's a very effective Lovecraft-inspired movie. The movie was written and directed by Jeremy Gillespie and Steven Kostanski. Gillespie primarily works in art departments, but is best known as a director for Inferno of the Dead, Father's Day, The Void, and Cowboys, an American folk tale. Kostanski is best known for Manboard, The Void, Psycho Gorman, and Frankie Frico. It stars Aaron Poole, Kenneth Welsh, and Kathleen Monroe. They all do a good job selling the horror of the situation. The movie was unrated, but I would give it an R for graphic violence. This is not for young kids. It had a runtime of 1 hour and 30 minutes, so it won't eat up your day. It gets to the meat of the story pretty quickly and holds your attention. Its budget is interesting. The only listed budget is $82,000 raised on Indiegogo, but that was to help with the effects. The rest of the budget is unknown. It made $368,000 worldwide. Without the full budget, I have no idea if this made a profit or not, but I would imagine it didn't. IMDb has it at 5.9 out of 10. Metacritic has it at 62 out of 100, and Rotten Tomatoes has it at 78% per critics and 48% per audience score. That makes for quite the interesting range. I would give it a solid 7 out of 10. This is definitely one of the better Lovecraftian films out there, and I say check it out. As always, thanks for watching. Until next time.
It's one small step for man.
Now cut!